It's a real pleasure for me to be speaking to you guys today. Hopefully today we can cover some of these things, and I want us to just have a little bit of an idea of what stress means to you. Now, some of the things that I mentioned in my working career about changing deadlines, about working with different and difficult stakeholders sometimes, working in very high-pressured environments where what you're trying to do somehow gets changed. Can I see a show of hands? Does anyone sort of recognize some of those things in their own workloads, yeah? I think maybe some of you are probably sitting here with your managers, so maybe you can't put your hands up, and that's fine. So today I really want us to just have a look at what is stress to us. Remember, this isn't a lecture. I'm not here to kind of educate you on the science of it all. It's really for you to kind of reflect on, well, what does stress mean to me in my life, and do I have the right tools to deal with it? So one of the things that I learned when I was starting to do research specifically on stress was what impact stress has on our health, on the human body itself. So I'm going to go through a little bit of that as well. We're also going to be looking at what are the techniques that have been around for thousands of years. What has humanity known for thousands of years that maybe we've forgotten over time, and we can start to remember some of those things as well. And then right at the end, we're going to be actually trying out a guided meditation. So we're actually going to try a couple of minutes of just seeing how we can manage our own stress. By a show of hands, has anyone here in this room ever tried meditation or mindfulness or any sort of practice like that before? 1, 2, a handful of people. Okay, excellent. So what we're going to be looking at is looking at where stress comes from. What is stress? How many of you would say that you experience stress on a daily basis? Yeah, 1, 2, a few of you on a daily basis. And remember, that's not necessarily just in the workplace, but at home as well. Anyone with young kids should be having their hands up right now. Right? I've got 2 boys, a 10 and an 8-year-old, every day. Every morning getting them ready for school, absolute nightmare. Very difficult to deal with. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, what time of the day does your stress begin? About 6 o'clock, about the time when the kids wake up? Yeah, about that sort of time, right? So how many of you would say that you find it difficult to switch off when you go home? Without just kind of binging in front of Netflix or the TV or something like that. If you didn't have the telly on or something to distract you, how many of you would say that I'd actually find it quite difficult to switch off at the end of the day? Yeah? Any of you finding that it's actually affecting your sleep? Finding it difficult to kind of sleep. So we realize that stress is something that's happening all of the time. Okay, guilty here. How many of you wake up first thing in the morning and check your emails, your work emails? Very, very early in the morning, yeah? And it's not a question of right or wrong, should we or shouldn't we, because I don't want the managers turning around being like, yes, you should be checking your emails, don't tell them not to. The point is, at what point of your day does your stress begin? And it's a question for you to kind of just reflect on yourself. At what time do I actually start my worrying? And then let's spend a bit more time looking at what stress actually is, and then we can start unpacking some of these questions along here. So, whenever anyone talks about stress, you always get this analogy. All the psychologists are always trying to explain stress, and actually it's quite a useful way to understand stress. Stress is the feeling of being under too much mental or emotional pressure. So what is stress? At the very basic kind of animal instinct kind of level, all human beings have a way of dealing with pressure. And in the old days and in the days when we were cavemen or whatever it was always the human body's ability to respond or react to some sort of external threat. Yeah? Does that make sense? Please stop me if it's not making any sense, because if it's not, then you're not going to be able to kind of follow on. The stress is your ability to cope with any kind of external pressure. And psychologists and scientists are always saying, back in the caveman days, our bodies developed a system that as soon as a lion was around to attack you or whatever, your body instantly had to react to that. The problem is we're all under stress these days, but we're not under that same kind of stress that some of our ancestors were. So now our stress probably looks a bit more like this, right? And so stress now becomes a response mechanism. Now the question is, how is it responding? What's exactly happening? And I want to go a little bit into the biology and the physiology of it, but I'm not a scientist, and there's probably a few people in here that know a lot more about it than I do. But I'm just going to cover a little bit about what's actually happening in your body as soon as you feel this kind of stress. So the first thing that happens, whether it's your senior manager or CEO walking into the office, or whether it's a lion chasing you or whatever it is, the first thing that happens is our brain receives some kind of signal that says there's a threat, there's something dangerous, there's something that's about to happen. So your brain perceives a danger or a threat, and it triggers this nervous system, this autonomic nervous system. And what happens is you get a couple of chemicals released from the body. The body says, right, it's time to do something now. Now we've got to react. We've got to do something about this stress. And when I explain this to my kids, I actually use this term action juice. Your body releases a whole kind of cocktail of action juices that says, right, you've got to do something. And I'm sure some of you would have heard these kind of names of things like adrenaline and cortisol. Yeah, anyone familiar with these terms? Yeah, maybe more adrenaline than cortisol. And I just want to go through what some of those things are. So your body instinctively says, right, here's a bunch of action juices in order for you to do some action now because there's a threat. Now, the interesting thing is, what do those chemicals do to our bodies? And this is where we start to see where the impact is starting to happen. So the first thing that happens is adrenaline, right? You get this adrenaline rush, which is a term that we've all heard. And what adrenaline allows is for your body to react straight away. It's this instant chemical that says, right, you've got to do something straight away. So they call the adrenaline this kind of fast-working, short-term response. And what that does is it increases your blood pressure. So your heart starts beating faster, right? And your breathing rate increases, your body temperature rises. And what it does, very interestingly, is it knows that you've got to run. You've got to run away. You've got to fight or flight. We've all heard those terms before. Now think about being chased by the lion scenario, right? Your body doesn't know the difference between a senior manager walking in the room or a lion walking into the room. Your body doesn't know, and no offense to any of the senior managers in the room, right? Your body doesn't know the difference. So what it says is, right, you've got to do something straight away. And it releases these chemicals. But what's interesting about it, in order for you to run, in order for you to fight or flight, it's got to take blood away from some of the other lesser important organs at that point. So it says, right, even if you've got food in your stomach right now, I can't be giving blood to your stomach in order to digest that food. Let's take that away. Even if you've got your respiratory system right, we need to give you more blood in there because you need to breathe faster. If you've got a disease, if you've got a external germ in your body right now, I can't give you all of the blood that you need right now to deal with that because you need all the blood going to your muscles, for example. So your body is taking blood away from certain organs in order to say, for a very short period of time, I need to give you all the energy to run. Is that making sense so far? Yeah? And then what happens is you release a second chemical, which is cortisol. And cortisol says, right, well, we've run away now. Now we've got to regulate the body because we've been running so fast or we've been panicked or whatever it is. Now we release a second chemical. That means that we've got to regulate your body. Now we've got to bring all your systems back together. Again, while it's doing that, it isn't giving you all of the blood that you need in the right places. So there we see your blood pressure. It starts to slow the pace of some of these things down. Now here's a very simple diagram of what's going on in your body. I hope everyone can see that. So when these action juices are released in your body, which is cortisol and adrenaline, then it increases your heart rate. Yeah, we all know that. When you get stressed, you increase your heart rate. It increases your blood pressure, your breathing, it actually gives you more energy because you need to run at that point. And it also dilates your pupils so that if it's dark, you can see in the dark, you can run faster. Some of the things that it reduces in your body, at that point when you're stressed, it reduces your digestion, it reduces your immunity, and it also, interestingly, reduces your feeling of pain. At that point, when you're running away from the lion, you're not worried so much about whether my leg hurts. It kind of overrides some of that. Now, the problem is we're no longer being chased by lions. In the old days, if we were being chased by lions, if we managed to get away, that threat is over. Within a couple of seconds, or a minute or two at the very max, you have managed to get away from that threat, so your body now comes back down. But CEO, senior management, demanding client, difficult phone call, baby crying, anything like that walks into the room, then that stays in the room, that stays. And so what happens now is we're now no longer dealing with short-term threats. We're dealing with dangers or threats, as our body perceives it, over a much longer period of time. So the kinds of stresses that we're dealing with are things like work-related stress, financial worries, worries about our career, where are we going in our lives, time pressures. Sometimes we're even stressed just going to work, whether the train is running late or whether there's traffic on the road. We're also worried about our families. We're also looking after relationship issues. Some of us have self-esteem issues, confidence issues. So, have anyone heard of this thing called social media envy? You're just looking at other people on social media and you're thinking, well, my life is not like that. So we're dealing with stresses that are just being repeated again and again. And so along comes this term chronic stress, which basically means we're now dealing with stress on a much longer term basis. Our body is in a perpetual state of stress. We're always releasing these chemicals. Now, where this becomes a problem is your body was never made to deal with those chemicals being in your body for extended periods of time. Cortisol is now being released over a much longer period of time. Now let's go back to the diagram and we start seeing, imagine now these same problems happening over a long period of time. Reduced digestion. So over long periods of time, we're talking stresses over weeks and months, you're not digesting your food over long periods now. You're not actually having strong immunity over long periods of time. So when you're more stressed, a lot of us know it has an impact on our body. We start feeling ill. We start getting ill. If you increase your heart rate, remember cortisol was meant to just increase your heart rate so that you can run faster. Well, if you're doing that over a long period of time, now you're developing heart problems. Now you're developing blood pressure issues. And so we can start to see that we're now looking at longer term issues that have happened. And I'm going to just kind of quickly wrap up on the sciencey bits, because then we can start talking about what actually can we do about it. So these are some of the things that have now been linked to prolonged chemical release, such as cortisol. It's very clearly now been demonstrated that these chemicals lead to heart problems. It leads to strokes, diabetes, muscle tension, increased infections. Cancer has also been linked to just having long periods of stress. The more recent scientific revelations that are coming out is that they've now found a direct correlation between the increase of cortisol in your body and it decreasing or wearing away something called the telomeres, which is the ends of your DNA. And telomeres have specifically been linked to our aging. So you are now aging faster if you're keeping these stress chemicals in your body for longer. So now the question is, what can we do about it? It sounds all doom and gloom. We really have to start now reflecting on what is it that's causing stress in our lives. So this is the bit where we get to start blaming everyone and anyone for the causes of our stress in our life. So just as a show of hands, or even shout out, what do you think some of the major causes of your stress are in your life? We talked about having kids in the house, rowdy kids in the house. Anything else in your work or in your house life? What was that? What? Which one?
Cardiff City.
Oh dear, Cardiff City Football Club. Okay, a lot of stress. So even supporting your team can increase a lot of stress. Anything else? What are the causes of some of the stress in your own lives? British Rail. Okay, the trains. Yeah, the commute to work, the traffic. Yeah. Any others? Workload, increased workload. Time pressures. Expectations of others or yourself? Say again?
Expectations of ourselves.
Expectations of ourselves. Okay. So we can see that rather than just being under threat by a single lion that might be catching us, throughout our day, we've got several sources of stress in our lives. And these are some of the things that we tend to blame when we're feeling stressed at work. So time pressures is definitely one. Working with difficult colleagues, unexpected changes to projects. You know, you put a lot of time into delivering something, and all of a sudden at the last minute, they want you to deliver something else. So these are the kind of things that happens. Lack of control over how you do your work and increased workloads. These are the kinds of things. And so very easily, we develop what I'm calling a blame mindset. And what we're doing is basically saying, I feel a certain way, I feel stressed, I feel like I'm under pressure, but it's not anything to do with me. It's to do with this or this. It's to do with the traffic, it's to do with the commute, it's to do with the external pressures that are there outside. And with a blame mindset, which is what we're all in, what we tend to do is we tend to take away our control to deal with our emotions. What we're basically saying in a blame mindset is, if the trains were running on time, if the manager could just make their mind up about what they wanted me to do, if the work pressure was less, if the external factor wasn't there, I'd be feeling okay. And what the ancient wisdom is telling us is completely the opposite. What the ancient wisdom is telling us is basically, you can't control what's happening on the outside, but you can start to take responsibility for your own reactions. And the ancient wisdom is trying to teach us that how you perceive life, how you think, is actually the major factor of how you feel. How you think is a major factor for how you feel. And what we do is we have really not begun to understand how we understand our emotions. We haven't really begun to really think about what is the cause of my own suffering? What's the cause of my own pressure and stress? Now, let me give you a simple example about how this works. Now, just think about, when was the last time you had a really bad stomach? Yeah? Had a really upset stomach. What's the first question that you ask? What's the first thing that you think about when you have a really bad stomach? What did I eat? Right? The very first question is, what external thing did I put into my body that I can blame? And that makes perfect sense. You know, if my kids come and say, oh, my head is hurting, my arm's hurting, we say, what happened? Did you bump it? Did you hit it on something? Did you poke yourself with something? Whatever it is. We instantly, when it comes to pain in our body, we straight away externalize and say, well, there must be some cause for it. Now, with our emotions, unfortunately, we also do the same thing, and I don't think that's the right approach. We straight away, if you're feeling bad, oh, what's wrong? What's happened? Who did somebody say something to you at work? Did someone do something to you? What is the external cause? And that's the birth of this kind of blame mindset, which is, oh, it's my manager who came in and said this to me, all right, this happened or whatever. Something external has happened. So we basically get into this mindset that says that if the external environment is okay, then I feel okay. If there's something wrong with the external environment, then I experience these negative emotions. And what the spiritual, the ancient wisdom is trying to teach us is that we need to move away from this kind of blame mindset. And so some of the things that we get taught is things like this. Happiness is not what the world gives you. Happiness is how you think about what the world gives you. Do you see the difference? It's not about what's happening in your day. It's about how you think about it, how you perceive it. So let's start going into what do we actually do about this. Let's think about this. When we say I'm feeling upset, I'm feeling frustrated, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling down, where do those feelings exist? Where do they exist for you? Do they exist somewhere outside or inside? They exist within you. Most of the time, they're happening within your mind. When was the last time you blamed your own thinking for your emotions? We tend not to do that, right? What we tend to do is, I'm sad because of you. I'm sad because of you, or this, or that, or the traffic, or whatever it is. I'm upset. My emotional state is out of balance because of that person or that thing. And we need to maybe start looking at, can we reverse that? Can we actually start reversing how we deal with that? And one of the phrases that I really like is, I can't control the outside, but my response is my responsibility. I can't control what's happening everywhere else, but how I think is really up to me. And this is where we start to take our own control and our own power back as to how we start feeling about these things. So, how do we cause our own stress? We cause our own stress by actually having a story that's repeated in our mind. Now, this is where it starts to become really interesting about what exactly is going on. Whenever something happens, there's three parts to anything, any sort of external event that we experience. There's the event itself. Manager walks into the room, tells us that we're doing everything wrong with the work that we're delivering. That happens. Part two is, how do we perceive that? And then how do we respond to that? And we never really understand that middle step. What we do is, manager came in, was really angry, was really frustrated, came in, really kind of let off steam and kind of told me, gave me everything, gave me all the pressure, gave me all the stress. And what we think happens is event and response. But in reality, there's a middle step that we haven't understood, which is the event happens, what do I think about that event, and then how do I respond? There's actually a fourth step, which is after that, event, perception, response, and then repeat. What then happens is the manager's left, but that story hasn't left. It just keeps going on and on and on in your mind. And so there starts to become this internal story in our mind, constantly going on about how we feel. There's a really interesting story that my mentor who taught me this wisdom gave me, and I've always remembered it, and I'd really like to share it with you. So there's two monks who are walking, and these are monks who are celibates. They have taken a vow to never touch a woman or to never lay hands on a woman, never have any relationship with a woman. They're celibate monks. They're walking along a path, and they come across a stream that they have to cross over. And at the side of a stream is a really old lady who needs clearly help to cross this stream. The first monk doesn't even say anything, doesn't even have a time to think about it. He literally just takes the old lady, puts her on his back, crosses the stream, lays her down on the other side, and then carries on walking. Now, about half an hour has passed, and the second monk says, look, I really have to stop you. I really need to ask you this question. Why did you pick up that woman? We've taken a vow of celibacy. We're not supposed to touch any women. The first monk says, when I picked up that woman, I crossed the river and I laid her down on the other side. Why are you still carrying her? And that's what we do. An event happens, but we carry on in our mind telling that story to ourselves. And this is something that I'm now able to see very clearly when I'm trying to raise my kids, and one of the kids goes off and they're very angry. Oh, my brother said this, or mum said this, or whatever. What happens is they don't know a technique to switch that off. And so half an hour later, an hour later, they're still huffing and puffing. And I actually have to explain to my kids, you know what, it's fine, even grown-ups, we do this sometimes. Something happens, the event has gone, but what happens is the story continues. I can't believe he said that to me. I can't believe that happened. This shouldn't have happened. Today it shouldn't have happened, of all the times. So this story continues. That continuing story is your mind repeating that threat again and again. And scientists now say that if an event happens, or the memory of an event happens, your body reacts in exactly the same way. So you're doing exactly the same thing to your body as if that threat had walked into the room. But as long as you keep remembering that, you're doing the same thing to your body. And the reason I brought up some of that physiology of it was I realized that personally I don't smoke or I don't drink. But I realized the reason I'm doing that is for my health benefits. But when I learnt about the destructive nature of those stress chemicals in our body, what it's doing, it's as harmful as some of those chemicals that I was trying to avoid. And I'm saying, wow, I'm actually creating my own health problems. I'm actually damaging my own body just by being in continuous stress when I stress about my work life or my home life. So the cause of that is actually our continuing thoughts. And now this ancient wisdom actually has the ability to tell you, right, we can actually switch that off. Let's find a way to stop that story. The events happened. Yes, it was negative. We didn't like that event. Yes, it was difficult. But can you now stop causing that event to happen again and again within your own mind? And so what we get into is trying to understand, how do we move away from this external story, external event that's now become internalized as a story within our minds. And the number one wisdom that's come across over thousands of years is where we are in life at this very moment is something that we need to align ourselves with. I'm sure some of you have heard these things around present moment awareness. Yeah, some of you, anyone heard this term before? Present moment awareness. The idea is, can you move your mind into what's happening now and away from what's happening in the internal story? Something bad's happened to you. Can you move that away from that story? Can you kind of step away from that now? And so the simplest way to start managing our stress is to understand a very simple formula. And I always say this, and I teach this to my kids as well, is your happiness or sadness is directly related to this formula, which is expectation minus reality equals happiness or sadness. So I'm going to explain that a little bit. Expectation minus reality equals happiness or sadness. And allow me to demonstrate just by giving you a couple of examples about the kind of things that I mean where we see this happening. So, let's say that you and I arrange to meet one day in a coffee shop. And we have a conversation about it, and we agree, okay, I'll see you there at 2 o'clock. Right? So I turn up at 2 o'clock, and I'm sitting there and I'm waiting. If you turn up at 2:30, when we've agreed that we're going to meet at 2 o'clock and you didn't call or you didn't send a text message, how would I feel? Annoyed. A little bit frustrated. I don't know if you ever remember, you guys probably remember as well, there was a time obviously before mobile phones where you call your friends and you say, right, I'll meet you at the pub, I'll meet you at the cinema, and you turn up there and you've just got to stand there. Because there was no phones or any way to get in touch with them, and you can't call their home because they've already left, and there's just no way of getting in touch with them. Yeah? When we were younger, our parents always said, keep a 10p coin so that you can use a phone box. I actually have to tell my kids now, look, that's a phone box, and they're amazed by this idea that there's a standing booth with just a phone in there. I was like, what do you mean you didn't have a phone on you? So kids are now in a very different kind of mindset. And so there was a time when you just called someone and you just had to wait. So you and me have agreed to meet. You haven't texted, you haven't called or anything. You turned up at 2:30, and I've been waiting there since 2 o'clock. I feel a little bit annoyed. Why do I feel annoyed? The reality is you turned up at 2:30. But I'm not in the reality. Where am I sitting? I'm sitting in my expectation. My expectation is you and me had agreed 2 o'clock and you didn't turn up at 2 o'clock. Reality has now moved on. Reality is now saying, well, we're here now. Are you able to deal with this moment? But I'm not saying that I want to deal with this moment. Now I'm going to sit there and I'm just going to be angry and I'm going to be frustrated and I'm going to be disappointed because I'm not letting go of my expectation of that moment. Let's say you turn up at 3 o'clock. How am I going to feel? Really cross, really frustrated. Do you see, the more your expectation deviates from the present moment reality, the more your emotion is going to be happy or sad. And we're talking about more the kind of the stress and the sad side of things. Now let's give a different scenario. Let's say that you turned up exactly on time. How am I going to feel then? Fine. Yeah, great. Delighted. Yeah, we said 2 o'clock, you turned up at 2 o'clock. What's happened? The reality has met my expectation. If you turned up 5 minutes before, great, even better. Yeah, I didn't have to wait, you had to wait. Yeah? So I'm not now at any point comfortable with the reality. All I'm doing is I'm just saying I'm going to live in my expectation of this moment, regardless of where reality is going or not. And you realize that the more life deviates from this mental story that you've created and you're going to hold on to, the more upset you're going to feel, the more stressed you're going to feel, the more angry you're going to feel. Now, let's turn the scenario in a different way. Let's say you and me agreed to turn up. Let's say, friends say, I want to turn up to your house. And I say, you know what? Come anytime on Sunday. Anytime on Sunday. What's my expectation? Anytime. So you turn up at lunchtime, 1 o'clock. How do I feel? Fine. Yeah, you turn up at 1 o'clock. You turn up at 6 in the evening. Fine. How do I feel? You turn up at 10 in the morning. How do I feel? Feel fine. Why? Because I didn't set any expectation, or my expectation was so wide, you couldn't disappoint. What if you turned up at 3 a.m.? How would I feel? I'd feel, right? You'd feel a little bit annoyed. Why? Because even though I said to you any time, I actually created a little bit of an expectation that any time was like any sensible time. Right? You see how it works? It's all to do with your expectation. The scenario is no different. You and me agree to meet at a coffee shop at 2 o'clock and you turn up at 2:30 is no different to you turning up at 2:30 at my house. The only difference is my expectation of those two scenarios. So this is what we mean about your response is your responsibility. You can't control why that person turned up late, and at that point it really doesn't make a difference what the scenario is. It's, I had a flat tire, I couldn't turn up, my battery died, and all those sorts of things. You're still saying, well, that's not excusable. My expectation is you were going to turn up on time. And that's quite a simple example. Now, I'll give you another example. It was my wife's 40th birthday yesterday. And let's say, for example, your partner says to you, or you say to your partner, your birthday's coming up, what do you want? And your partner says, I don't want anything. Right? Birthday comes along and you've done nothing. How do they feel? They're going to feel annoyed. Why? Because even though they said one thing, they created an expectation in their mind. And the expectation was, well, I didn't mean nothing. I meant surprise me. Right? So it's a very simple idea of how people are creating mini expectations all the time. So let's take the example of commuting to work. You go to work, without even consciously realizing it, you've created an expectation that everything's going to run on time and there's going to be no traffic on the roads. Right? You don't actually think about that, but that expectation gets created. So, lo and behold, you turn up or you're driving at work and there's traffic. How do you feel? Instantly you feel, oh, well, hang on, this is not right. You're not calm and relaxed. We start to feel, well, I'm running late. And we only have to see how we react when we're even 5 minutes late to something important, and we start to realize how much this expectation versus reality is impacting our lives. Yeah? So you expect there's going to be no traffic. If there's any traffic, then your emotional response kicks off. I'm going to be late, this is bad, it's so terrible, I blame all the other drivers, why do they all have to go at the same time, why can't they go at different times, why can't they start schools at different times as the workplaces? You start going into this mental story, this narrative kicks off, and we're just never aware of this story. We're just only aware that we feel terrible at this point. So starting to understand how we deal with this perceived threat that's on the outside is a really important factor in how we deal with our stress. So another really simple way to understand this is, as I perceive, so I receive. As I think, so I feel. So it's now no longer a question of what did he say to me or what happened. The question is, how did you think about it? How do you choose to respond to that scenario? And it really is a choice. So let's go back to some of this kind of spiritual wisdom, meditative wisdom. And unfortunately, as soon as you start using terminology like this, people get a little bit scared. They're like, well, I don't want anything to do with religion or spirituality or anything like that. It all sounds a bit woo-woo. But in reality, when we use terminology like inner peace, these aren't actually religious terms. These are just terms to do with your own internal state, to do with your own well-being. So these are not just kind of marketing slogans. These are states of human beings that have been experienced, and people are trying to say, you know what, it's actually possible for you to be in a state of long-lasting calmness, long-lasting bliss. And we kind of write a lot of these words off. And a way to understand this is first to start understanding, how do our brains work? So I want us to try a little experiment for 30 seconds. Put your pens and things down, and just everyone sit up straight and close your eyes for 30 seconds. Very quickly, yeah? Okay, close your eyes for 30 seconds, and I want you to just become aware of what thoughts come into your mind. Don't spend too long dwelling on a particular thought. Just become aware of what thought comes into your mind. And then take a deep breath in, and breathe out, and open your eyes. Can anyone share what thought came into their mind? How many of you thought about food? Anyone thought about food? How many have thought about a family member? A few of you. How many of you thought about something that's going to come up next? I wonder what's next. What's going to happen after this session? Yeah? How many of you thought about a work-related issue, a deadline or something to do with work? Okay? Interesting. So, the question now is, my instruction in that exercise was observe what thought came into your mind. The question you have to ask yourself is, how many of you chose that thought? So, for those of you who thought about family members, for those of you who thought about work pressures, for those of you who thought about what was happening next, how many of you made a conscious decision, I'm going to think about my family member? And you realize, no, I didn't actually make a choice. And when we close our eyes and just look at what's going on in our minds, we realize our minds are constantly firing off thoughts, and we're not actually the ones delivering those thoughts. In fact, we're on the receiving end. So a lot of the times people think about the next meal, food comes in, and it tends to be the guys as well mainly, who just think about the next meal, what's coming up next. A lot of time people just think about someone in their family. The question is, when you sat down and just looked at your thoughts, you realize that you didn't actually generate that thought. The thought just tends to happen. And this is where we start realizing that our reactions are also in that same way. As soon as someone says something, we believe the first thought that comes into our head. So somebody talks to us in a negative way, an aggressive way, for example. The mind says, oh, I can't believe he said that. He shouldn't have said that. Are you going to let him get away with that? All these thoughts start firing off, and we take ownership of those thoughts. And we're like, yes, that's the right way to think. The ancient wisdom is starting to show us you don't actually have to listen to that first thought. That first thought isn't necessarily the best one. It just happens to be your trained response. In fact, you're probably already going to know what kind of thought you're going to have based on who it is that's walked into the room. A good friend walks into a room, a colleague that you get along well with walks into the room, happy thoughts starts triggering off. Somebody who you don't quite like or you find quite difficult to work with, as soon as they walk into the room, your negative automatic response starts happening in your mind. So we now start to realize that we have very little control over the thoughts in our minds. The thoughts are actually happening, and we're on the receiving end of our thoughts. We're not necessarily the generators of our thought. And that starts to become quite uncomfortable with people. You say, well, what do you mean? What, do I not control my thoughts? Do I not have any control? What's going on? And this is where the ancient traditions, the meditative wisdoms have started to show us that we need to become better at observing our thoughts. So the example that I use when I'm speaking to my kids about this is they go to swimming lessons once a week, and sometimes they are unhappy, or I don't want to go to swimming lessons, Dad, or it's too hard, it's too difficult, or it takes too long, it's very difficult, we're doing a backstroke or forward stroke, and I find it very difficult to do. And what I have to remind them is that the reason you're learning to swim is so that at any point, if you get into difficult waters, you're able to manage. The example that I give them is you don't want to learn how to swim when you fall into water. That's not the point at which you want to start learning how to swim. You start learning how to swim so that when you enter into difficult waters, you're already capable of dealing with it. And the same is also true for starting to learn how to manage our stress and manage our minds. A lot of the time people come up to me and they say to me, I'm stressed, tell me what to do. And it's very difficult at that point to say, right, this is what you need to do, when you haven't learned all the things that you need to do. It's the same example of, look, I'm going to go into a really deep water, tell me how to swim. Well, no, it doesn't quite work that way. You've got to learn how to practice doing this on a regular basis. So this is where the ancient traditions are saying, actually, you need to do this on a daily basis. You need to learn how to manage your own well-being on a daily basis. And this goes back to me asking this question about what time does your stress begin in the day? And we realize when we start observing our thoughts that we are actually thinking stressful thoughts right from the beginning of the day. So when you wake up in the morning, think about what kind of fires off in your mind. As soon as you wake up in the morning, I know for me, all the things that I need to do, the immediate deadlines, the immediate pressures start firing off in my brain. So you wake up in the morning and you're already stressed. I feel better when I wake up in the morning and my kids are still asleep. But if I wake up in the morning and I can hear the kids running around, I start to panic a little bit. Oh, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, I've got to get them ready for school, I've got to get them to their football practice, or I've got to take them to their class, or whatever it is. You start straight away this constant barrage of thoughts that are going on, which is causing this daily stress. And if we were able to just reel that back in for a moment, and we're able to manage that, we start to control how these chemicals are being released in our body. We start to kind of neutralize some of those things. So when you're brushing your teeth in the morning, when you're having a shower in the morning, maybe at the end of today or tomorrow morning, try and notice, where does my mind go? What am I thinking of? Am I causing my own stress at this moment just by thinking about something that's worrying me? So changing your internal narrative becomes very important. And this is something that I go through on a daily basis, and it's a very useful exercise that takes literally a second, and I find I'm able to interrupt my narrative. And so let me give you an example. I drop my kids to school every day, and every day the experience for me is very different. Sometimes when I'm driving my kids to school, I think, oh wow, isn't it lovely? I get to have a couple of minutes where it's just me bonding with the kids, and I really enjoy hearing their stories about what they're going to be doing in school or what's going on, or just spending that time. The next day comes along and they're very excited and they're screaming at each other and they're like having a great laugh with each other. And I'm completely just in a stressful mind because I'm thinking, oh, I just want them to be quiet. And at other times they're being really rowdy and they're being really excited, and I'm completely neutral. The same scenario happens every day, but for whatever reason, I seem to have a different response every single day. Now, what's different? Every day, how I think changes. The commute is exactly the same. The drive is the same. The amount of time is the same. The kids are the same. Some days, the kids are completely silent and they're just looking out the window, and I think, oh, this is amazing. It's fantastic. It's rare, but it does happen just on the odd occasion. But you know the expectation that I create on the days where I'm getting a little bit stressful and I'm having to shout at my kids, please stop screaming at each other. I've created an unrealistic expectation that every day they're going to be quiet. Every day is going to be blissful. And we don't think about how we create these unrealistic expectations every single day for the same scenario. And so you can see that in your work environment as well. You go into work not expecting anything difficult to happen. You don't go into work thinking these things are going to happen or some sort of threat is going to come along, someone's going to be rude or mean, or something's going to change in the projects that we're working on, or some client is going to change their mind and say that they want some completely different requirement. These things are happening all the time, but we create a very unrealistic expectation of how our day is going to be. We don't learn to expect the unexpected. And when the unexpected happens, the stress response kicks off. So the question is, can you now find a practice that's going to allow you to be okay no matter what's happening on the outside? And this is where I'm hoping to take this in the last couple of minutes. The way to do this is we have to learn to switch off this internal story or to divert our attention away from this internal story. The internal narrative that kicks off either when we're stressed or when something negative has happened. This story just keeps going on in our head. I can't believe he said that. This shouldn't have happened. I'm so mad at this person. And that, you'll notice, can carry on for several days unless you learn to interrupt that way of thinking. And we've seen what that way of thinking is doing to our bodies. We're actually causing a lot of damage to our own bodies. But we can very easily learn a simple technique to block that or stop that internal story. So how do we do that? And this is where we need to find a very simple way to block that. A question that I ask myself when I'm driving my kids to school, and one of those days tends to be the ones where the kids are very, very rowdy, and I'm just I'm not enjoying it. I'm not in a good state of mind. Straight away, I ask myself this question: what was my expectation of this moment? And as soon as I ask myself that question, then I'm able to step away from that story. And I said, oh yeah, I expected them to be quiet. Silly me. I expected an 8 and a 10-year-old to just be quiet all the time. That's an unrealistic expectation that I set myself without thinking. I'll give you another example. With the work that I do now, I get to travel quite a lot. And I was traveling to LA, and it was the first time that I'd gone, and I was giving quite a big presentation. And right from the moment that the taxi had picked me up to take me to the airport, I found myself in this little bit of anxiety. I was a little bit concerned, and I wasn't sure what I was concerned about. But I was just feeling like, okay, this is quite a big deal. And I realized straight away that this feeling inside me is a little bit uncomfortable. I then asked myself this question: what's my expectation of this moment? My expectation of this moment is I'm going to get to the airport, and I'm going to board the flight, and then I'm going to go, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to turn up there and deliver my presentation. And I realized I've actually set an unrealistic expectation. The taxi might not even get to the airport. Then what are you going to do? All the plans that you're making in your head for the next week stop straight away. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, that's even more cause for stress. What if I don't get to the airport on time? But my thinking at that point was, you know what? You might not even get to the airport. You might not even get on the plane. So why are you planning so far in ahead and worrying about something when just enjoy the moment? Right now, just be here. Be present in this moment. And as soon as I was able to ask myself a question to interrupt my story, I could hop off that train of thought. And I brought myself back and I said, okay, right now I'm sitting in an Uber and I'm just enjoying the ride. Just be here, be present in this moment. Can we learn some of these techniques to switch these off? So at any point, if you can ask yourself this question, what is my expectation of this moment? Whenever you feel a negative emotion, and then you realize my expectation is I was expecting something else to happen, and because that something else didn't meet my expectation, I'm now going to be in a difficult emotional state. Now here's something for you to reflect on. What do you call something that's in your head but's not a reality outside? a scenario or something that's in your mind but isn't actually real. What do we call that? A delusion? What else? What was that? A dream? A fantasy. We create fantasies all the time. We're always creating a fantasy in our mind. And our mind is saying, my fantasy was that this is going to happen, and when it didn't happen, I'm still holding on to that. So in the last couple of minutes, I want us to actually try a meditation. I want us to see, can we try a very simple technique? And I've put a couple of more techniques, and there's more techniques certainly in the booklets that have been handed out on your seats. There are many techniques, hundreds of techniques to actually break this story. We have mantra techniques where you can just say a particular word or a phrase. I like to use the word thank you. It's a very powerful mantra. All day, every day, just thank you. As I'm walking around, thank you, thank you. I'm just saying thank you to the universe, not for anything in particular, but just to be in a state of gratitude. And the most simple technique is to just hop off your train of thought and bring your awareness to your breathing. And I want us to all try that just for a few moments. If everyone could just sit up straight and close your eyes. Start again as before, where you're just observing what's going on in your mind. Try not to judge anything that's going on in your mind and simply just observe it as it is. Now I want you to become aware of your breathing. Bring your attention to the breath. Just notice how your breath is moving into your body and moving back out again. Maybe try to slow your breathing down. So you're taking longer breaths in and longer breaths out. And you might find that while doing this, your mind starts to wander and you start thinking about something. And as soon as you realize that you've got lost in a particular thought, just let that thought float away. Bring your attention back to your breathing. Remember to slow your breathing down. Taking deep breaths in and breaths out. Try not to get carried away with any particular thought. As soon as you realize that you've got carried away with a thought, let that go. Bring your attention back to your breathing. And it's perfectly fine, even right now, if you're questioning why you should be doing that. Even that's another thought. Don't try and answer that question. Just bring your awareness back to your breathing. And now, once you've been breathing for a couple of minutes and being aware of your breathing, now look at the content of your mind. Notice, is there a different quality to it? Do you feel less connected to your thoughts? Do you feel slightly more able to distance yourself from the inner voice, the internal dialogue? And just take one last deep breath in. Hold it. Hold. Hold. And breathe out. And open your eyes. Now, the next time somebody asks you, has anyone tried meditation, you can at least all put your hands up and say that you've tried it. Well, I hope you're finding some of that a little bit useful. It's very important that you take time to practice this if you feel it's beneficial to you. Like I said before, there are actually hundreds of meditations that are out there. And it's very important to trial some of these things. And one of the most common things that I hear is people say to me, I don't have time to meditate. And I always say this 2 times in the day when you definitely have to meditate. When you wake up in the morning, you've got 5 minutes. You've always got 5 minutes before you get out of bed. And if If you haven't, set your alarm 5 minutes earlier to just bring yourself into this kind of calm state. And then also at the end of the day when you get into bed. And I'm sure some of us are guilty of waking up first thing in the morning and we pick up our phone straight away. And at the end of the day, we look at our phone and that's the last thing that we kind of put down, and then we try and close our eyes. What are we doing? Are we creating more stress? Or can we distance ourselves from some of the causes of our stress? So definitely try and do that as much as possible if you find it useful. And the purpose of doing this is that what you start to do, it goes back to that swimming analogy, is you start to become better at dealing with your own mind. You become better at dealing with your responses because now you've learned how to create a little bit of distance between that automatic reaction that's going on and then you saying, actually, no, I choose not to respond in that way today. And remember the other phrase that I mentioned earlier on in the beginning of the presentation, I can't control what's happening outside, but my response is my responsibility. So I hope you found that useful. We've got a minute or two for any questions, if anyone's got any questions. If not, I've got some booklets on there. Feel free to take them, and we've got some spare copies as well if you want. And they are very useful guides around a beginner's guide to meditation and also a very simple guide to finding happiness and a little bit more peace in your life. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you benefited from that. If you'd like to help us create more spiritual content, then head over to our website, nanaknaam.org/donate, and think about setting up a regular monthly donation. We're a 100% non-profit organization, so all the donations that you give us go directly into the charity and that help us to create and share Gurmat spiritual wisdom.